Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA, the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, and WOW, the Wonder of Women, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind program on parenting during the pandemic with Lori Gottlieb and Dr. Dan Siegel. We are honored to have both of these New York Times best-selling authors and renowned mental health experts here with us today to share their knowledge and expertise about parenting during this unprecedented time. Now, you may have noticed that I just mentioned the names of 3 organizations, and I promise you won't be quizzed on the names. What we would like you to know and keep in mind is that all of us at UCLA who support mental health education, research, and clinical care have partnered together during this coronavirus era to bring you relevant and informative programs about mental health issues that affect 46.6 million people every year in this country alone. And that statistic is from before these days of quarantine, uncertainty, and civil unrest. For those of you who are new to the Open Mind, this is the Friends of the Semel Institute's lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders in science and culture to present programs about mental health issues as a free public service to the community. These Open Mind programs were previously held at UCLA in person, but due to the challenges of the coronavirus era and social distancing, we've pivoted to this virtual Zoom platform so we could continue to bring our programs to you. The silver lining here is that we are now able to welcome people from all over the country, even from Canada, who are interested in mental health. And we are very, very excited and honored to welcome you. A few housekeeping notes before I introduce our esteemed speakers. Everyone's Zoom has been automatically muted. There will be an opportunity to ask our speakers questions after their discussion. At the bottom of your Zoom, you will see a Q&A function. And if you would type in your question there, we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible during the time allotted. I also want to thank the parents who submitted questions beforehand. We've tried our very best to incorporate all of them into today's discussion. And one last thing, this program is being taped, and you will find it housed on the Friends of the Semel Institute's website in a few days' time. So please let your friends and colleagues and family who were not able to tune in today know that they can still have the opportunity to watch this program and other past Open Mind programs that they may have missed. Again, it is an honor to have with us today Lori Gottlieb and Dr. Dan Siegel. Both have been featured speakers for past Open Mind programs, and we are thrilled to welcome them back. Lori was also going to be a featured speaker at our WOW, the Wonder of Women Summit this past April, which of course, thanks to this pesky virus, got postponed. Lori Gottlieb is a psychotherapist and author of the New York Times bestseller, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which is being adapted as a television series and has also been translated into many languages. In addition to her clinical practice, she writes the Atlantic's Dear Therapist advice column and contributes regularly to the New York Times and many other publications. Her recent TED Talk is one of the 10 most watched of the year. She's a member of the Advisory Council for Bring Change to Mind and advisor to the Aspen Institute, and a sought-after expert on shows like The Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, CNN, and NPR's Fresh Air. Her new iHeartRadio podcast, Dear Therapists, produced by Katie Couric, will premiere this year. Perhaps her most important credential for this particular discussion is that she is the mother of a 14-year-old son who just graduated from middle school. Welcome, Lori Gottlieb. Well, Lori will be with us in just a moment. I know she's trying to get in. I'll go ahead and introduce oh, there she is. Hi, Lori.
There we go.
Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Well, as we all are. So far, there are 434 people tuned in to watch this discussion, and more are coming in each moment. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Daniel Siegel. He is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He's also the executive director of the Mindsight Institute, which focuses on the development of mindsight, insight, empathy, and integration in individuals, families, and communities. Dr. Siegel has published extensively for both the professional and lay audiences. His 5 New York Times bestsellers are Aware, The Science and Practice of Presence, Mind, A Journey to the Heart of Being Human, Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, particularly relevant here, and 2 books with Tina Payne Bryson, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. His other books include The Developing Mind, The Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology, Mindsight, The Mindful Brain, and The Mindful Therapist. He has also written The Yes Brain and The Power of Showing Up with Tina Payne Bryson, which he will be speaking about at our upcoming Open Mind program on September 15th. So be sure to tune in. Dr. Siegel also serves as the founding editor for the Norton Professional Series on Interpersonal Neurobiology, which currently contains over 70 notebooks. So let's get started. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Vicki. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you to both of you we know how busy you are, for taking the time to educate us all about parenting during the pandemic. So we've talked to a number of parents, and many are concerned about parenting during this time. And they're particularly concerned with how to deal with the discomforts of their children, their fears, anxiety, disappointments, loneliness, and the proverbial "I'm bored," while dealing with their own similar concerns and feelings. How does a parent maintain their own mental health while dealing with all of this?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start. So I think that some of what we're learning about now during the pandemic is really relevant all of the time, and not just in a time of crisis. And when we talk about our kids and their discomfort, I think we need to look at our own discomfort with their discomfort. So a lot of times, let's say before the pandemic, your kid might say to you something like, "I'm sad," and we say, "Let's go have some ice cream," instead of "Tell me more about your sadness," right? Or we try to fix it for them. Or they say, "I'm anxious," and then we say, "Oh, don't be scared. There's no reason to be afraid of that." So we almost want to talk them out of their feelings because it makes us uncomfortable to see them struggle. And so right now, a lot of kids might be saying things like, "I really miss my friends. This is really hard. I'm really struggling." And some parents might say, "Well, you'll see your friends in a few months." But I think what's much more helpful for our kids is to say, "Yeah, it really sucks. It's really hard not to be able to see your friends right now." And, just those 3 words, "tell me more," are magic when it comes to really helping our kids to hear themselves and to help them to access their own feelings and sort through and process what's going on inside of them. We don't have to do that work for them. We just need to be there, be present for them while they do that work.
Dan, do you have anything to add to that? Oops, I think we've lost your mic.
Let's see. How about now? Is that working?
Perfect.
Yeah, great. First of all, thank you, Vicki, for having us. And Lori, it's great. This is the first time Lori and I are kind of meeting each other in the long run, other than just a few minutes before, and also teaching together. So this is really fun. And I would just build on those beautiful things that, Lori, you just said, and just add, I guess, maybe focusing on the aspect of this intricate question about how do they take care of their own mental health. And it really builds on what Lori said, which is, you know, when you look at the field of attachment, and so there's a whole science of parent-child relationships, and this is the area of research when I was at UCLA. What I did my research fellowship in was to study how parents interact with children. And it turns out that your own inner mental state, what you can simply call parental presence, is the best predictor of how children end up. And it's also a predictor of the well-being of the parent. So when you look at what the notion of parental presence is from a scientific point of view, and then say, what are the practical aspects of that? It's exactly what Lori was just saying. It's how do you actually bring your awareness in this receptive way, that's what we call presence, so that if your child's saying, I'm bored, or I'm worried, or, you know, I've seen all this stuff about the pandemic and I'm really scared, instead of you being overwhelmed by your own fear or your own anger about what's going on, or your own sense of loss and sadness, you've done the inner work. And this is where it's such an amazing field, attachment science, that it's the inner work of us as parents, from the inside out, basically, that allows us to then be present for the child. So when the child is presenting whatever they're presenting, we need to do it first. So if we're not comfortable with the pandemic, and we're not comfortable with frightening things that are going on with, let's say, the riots and social injustice and in the government and all the other things, we could go on and label them. And it's important to name them, because if we can name them, we can have the opportunity to tame them. But just to say this, that it starts with you. And when you think about your deciding to come listen to us today, you could ask the question, what's going on with me that got me to spend this hour with Lori and with Dan and with Vicky? You know, what's happening? And then to identify that particular thing and use that as an opportunity to actually deepen your own self-understanding. And there's lots of ways we can talk about doing that. But that's the beginning, because no matter what specific things anyone tells you about parenting, it all comes down, if you look at the science, to how you can show up for your kids and be there for them with your own presence.
Thank you, Dan. That was beautiful. And I think something that we all aspire to be able to do. How do you help, especially teens, how do you help them make sense of this world and put it all into context? Because even for adults, there is so much coming at us all the time. How do you put it all into context for them?
Lori, do you want to start? Or
I'll let you start this time.
Okay. And we can go back and forth. You know, Zoom is always hard because only the yellow box gets around one person talking. So you can do the thing like they did in Portlandia once, where they go, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go. And then you realize after they're there for 8 hours, they're in a car called the Yugo. So anyway, you had to be there to watch that. So let's start with a basic notion that, first of all, and this relates to the two questions, this is a really, really difficult time for adults, for adolescents, for kids, for everyone. So let's just acknowledge that. And I think the military term that the journalists have taken over, which we can use in parenting, is important to name, which is the acronym VUCA. The V stands for volatile, meaning things are changing really fast. The U stands for uncertain, meaning it's really hard to know what's going on. The C of VUCA stands for complex, meaning even if you spend hours reading the newspaper and listening to the news, you still can't get how the whole system is, what's going on. And then A is ambiguous. That is, even when you think you have a notion of, oh, it's going on this way, it actually was a different way. And so everything has a different kind of meaning than what you think it might have. So there's a lot of ambiguity. Now, when you take a deep breath around the ambiguity, the complexity, the uncertainty, and the volatility, this VUCA time we're in, then the way to think about it as a parent, and then we'll get to the adolescent part of this question in a moment, the way to think about it as a parent is you don't have to have all the answers. You need to show up. In this book, Tina Payne Bryson, my co-author, and I wrote, called The Power of Showing Up, it's that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So the goal of parenting isn't to be perfect. It's actually to be present, to show up. Now, what would it mean to show up in VUCA times? It would mean to be able to say, you know something, I don't know exactly what's going on, or to look at one scientific issue, which is called epistemic trust. That is, can you trust authority figures to be presenting an actual view of reality? And when you see that it's being distorted in various ways by various individuals in the political arena, then you can say there's a violation to epistemic trust. So that can give you an agitated feeling that the people, quote, in control are actually not paying attention to our deepest source of knowledge, which is science. And a society that discards science is discarding reality. And so people are feeling this agitation in this particular country, but around the world too. It's happening not just in the United States. So you can say to your kid, whether it's a child or an adolescent, you know, let's talk about what these VUCA times and name them mean, because there's a lot of feeling of anxiety, sadness, even a grief about how things used to be one way. And if you just read the science of this virus, it may be with us for a long, long time. And so the kind of lives we used to live before January are not available to us now. And we're going to need to adjust. Now, to be there with the emotions, and there was a study out of UCLA, which I kind of summarized with the simple phrase, name it to tame it. When you look at those studies, when you put a word to an emotion, as simple as a parenting move that is, it's a huge brain move you're giving to your child, because when a child or a teen can look inward, identify, like, I'm feeling scared, and you can talk to them, how are you feeling? And like Lori beautifully said before, instead of saying, oh, let's change the subject, let's do something else. No, you say, tell me more about that. You know, and then they start telling you more. Now you have to be ready in your own body when they say, I'm scared, what's going on? I don't understand. Why can't I be with my friends? What's happening? Why are there people dying? Are we gonna die? Is grandma gonna die? All these things. You need to do the inner work so that when your teen or your child presents that to you, they can see in something called social referencing, they're going to refer to you socially, to your emotional response. And if you can say, you know, these are really hard VUCA times, you name what the VUCA is, and so I feel sad, and I let myself have the sad feeling without saying I am sad. I say I feel sad. And they go, what are you talking about? You go, well, because I can have lots of feelings. I can have the feeling of sadness and also feel joy at the same time. I can feel scared and feel excited at the same time. So how you name these emotions actually liberates you to articulate them, let them be there without pushing them away or clinging to them. And when you do that, all the brain studies show the emotion passes through you. When you can share it with another person, especially, it changes in some fascinating ways, that we aren't alone anymore. And that even if it's about grief, sadness, fear, the anxiety of uncertainty, when we can name it, we can tame it. And when we can share it, then we can learn to regulate it.
Thank you, Dan. That's name it and tame, name it to tame it. I think that's a expression to remember. Lori, did you have?
Yeah, and we can come back to the teenagers, because that's a special part of the question that, you know, I mean, there's an entire book I wrote about that called Brainstorm, which we can get into it, but that's a whole specialty issue of parenting a teen during these times, which we should talk about.
Well, I know Lori is parenting a teen right now, a 14-year-old young man who's just about ready to now go to high school.
Yeah.
How's that going?
Well, it's going. And I think, you know, it's interesting to watch it from the perspective of somebody who does this kind of work clinically, and then also just being a parent and watching your own child go through it. I think that what you said, Dan, was so wise about Presence. First of all, somebody wrote into my Dear Therapist column in the Atlantic that I write every week and said, you know, I'm doing all these things during the pandemic. What else can I be doing for my kids? And what I said was that in order to be present for your kids, you need to be present for yourself first. And that's exactly what Dan was talking about. And Dan, you were also talking about the ambiguity. And I think what is really going to help our kids grow emotionally through this time, and something that they can take with them as we start to emerge from this, is this idea of sometimes there's a discrete incident and the kids are having feelings about it, but this is something where it's very uncertain, it's very ambiguous. It started here and it's going to end here, and now how do we process that event? This is an ongoing stressor. And so when you have something like that, I think transparency is so important. And Dan, you touched on this as well, where, we are setting the tone. We are setting the emotional tone in the household. And the kids need to know, especially teens, because teens are very savvy. And they, I think that younger kids sort of trust us unconditionally in a way that our teens are habituated not to, as they start to sort of explore and separate. But right now, what they really need to know is that we're being transparent. So I think the words "I don't know" are fine to say. So when they ask a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, "I don't know." And the message is, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that anybody has the answer to that. Or maybe we can try to explore the answer to that and see if we can find a better answer than I have right now. But I am here with you throughout this. So even though I don't know that, I am here with you and traveling on this path with you. You are not alone on this path. So there's the ambiguity and the uncertainty. And I think that life is like that. So we don't have to be in the middle of a pandemic to experience what we will all experience in life, which is uncertainty. And so the more practice that they can get managing it now, it will be familiar to them. Neurologically, they will have had the experience of going through this, and they will recall this later when they experience other kinds of uncertainty and stressors. So how we handle this now kind of sets the tone for what's going to happen for them later. I think also with teens, they can think more abstractly. So when you say to them, you can talk about the both and of the situation, which is really useful in any time of life. So right now, an example might be, it's really great for me to get to see more of my son because he was doing remote learning, and we got to spend a lot more time together. We had a lot more family time. If I could snap my fingers, I would take away COVID in a second, right? And it's horrible, and there's so much suffering and loss and grief and all of that. So both are equally true and valid in the present moment. And so we can experience joy, and we can experience anxiety, and we can experience sadness, and we can experience relief, maybe, that they don't have to, there's some obligation they're out of right now. We can experience all of that. And I always say that feelings are like weather systems. They blow in, they blow out. Sometimes when teenagers especially have a feeling like they feel very sad or they feel very anxious, they feel like it's going to be there forever, or it's going to be there for a very long time. So it's really important to remind them that this is the weather right now, and the weather's going to change, so that they have that perspective even when they're, having a really hard time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in a teenager especially, and Lori, I don't know if your son is experiencing this, but there's this big shift that he probably started when he started middle school, so instead of going towards your parents when you're like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in school, you start going toward your peers, which is a very natural transition towards independence. But now with isolation, he, like other adolescents, are confronted with the inability to hang with his friends, and there's a beautiful book by also a UCLA person. I think you've also had her on, Barbara Natterson Horowitz, who wrote Wildhood, and it's a beautiful, great book. But the take-home message from that fantastic book she wrote with a colleague is, adolescence, like your 14-year-old son. My kids are now beyond their adolescence; they're 26 and 30. But when they were adolescents, we experienced this. They need their peers. it's a part of the natural thing, not just in humans, but in all adolescents. Adolescence is in a lot of species. And so I try to remember this crucial essence of adolescence with 4 elements that aren't, I'm an acronym nut, but this is the acronym. It's the essence is ES. So for your 14-year-old, if he's a typical adolescent, what's going to happen, and you study the brain as we've done at UCLA and the brain center there, studying regular old adolescents from, before adolescence to after adolescence, the brain is more emotional. So there's an emotional spark, ES of essence, where the reason for it is to kind of drive you to get ready to get out of the house. So there's a good reason for it, but the downside is, and it's a challenge, is that those weather conditions that you're talking about, Lori, can be more intense, during the climate change, if you will, of adolescence. So teaching kids how to surf those things, or in the Brainstorm book, we teach this thing called the Wheel of Awareness, which comes from this table actually here, where we say, look, there's a way you can put the weather conditions on the rim, and the sky itself, if you will, is this hub of this wheel. And then what that does is it allows them to say, oh, I see, I'm the sky, not just the clouds, to go with your analogy of the weather conditions. And that is incredibly empowering. So that's the emotional storm. You can teach kids, especially adolescents, how to deal with their emotions. Number 2 is SE is social engagement. And here you can try as best you can to honor your 14-year-old's need for social connections. You could say, well, why do you need this? Well, because you're getting ready to leave the comfortable, familiar home. And so you're driven to be more with peers than with your parents. And so honoring that, and making a joke out of it or whatever, and giving him an opportunity to physically distance while not being socially distancing. The term social distancing, I think, should be abandoned, and we should use the word physical distancing, because we need social connections. And that's the importance of social engagement, the SE. The downside is you can collapse in the face of peer issues when in fact you need to be having peer relationships. So you collapse to peer pressure to have membership. The next one is novelty seeking. And this is really hard when you're stuck at home. That part of the drive that Barb Natterson talks about, Horowitz talks about in the book, that's so beautiful that you see across all the studies, is adolescents have got to have novelty. So there he is at home with his mom and his dad, and how do you actually allow this thing where basically it's based on dopamine in the brain, for lots of different reasons in the brain, you can see why this is the case. But the reason is to try to get ready to get into a new home environment. And unfortunately, the downside is you can take risks, but with COVID-19, the issue is you don't want them to be taking risks at a time when it could mean either their own illness or spreading the illness around. So it's a particular challenge, this novelty part of the essence, but it's still workable. And the final one, the CE, is creative explorations, where if you can provide your adolescent new ways of challenging the status quo, of thinking about how things are and thinking outside the box, the research is really clear. The adolescent brain's changes are trying to push against what the adult society has offered them and try to imagine both how the world could be and even how the world should be. So this moment of realizing how interconnected we all are, and realizing with the protests going on and the murder of people of color, that there's injustices that need to be righted. And for an adolescent who's struggling with how should the world be, this is a moment to really embrace and empower them to think deeply about what kind of world do they want to create. And the disruption of this pandemic, I think, is an incredible opportunity. We have a whole community that's kind of devoted to this, an opportunity to think, how do we want the world to be when we come through this, and even as we live in it? How is the world going to be more just, more embracing, for example, of the interconnectivity, not only across races and nationalities, but even with the environmental pandemic of the destruction of Earth? How can we maybe live in a new way, which is exactly what adolescents are capable of considering, that we need to learn from.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about sort of empowering our teens, because one thing that I think, if there are any silver linings to come out of this time for our teens, certainly there's the sense, well, one, you talk about the language that we use, right? That you don't like social distancing. I agree with you. I hate the word isolation, because we aren't actually isolated. And especially for teens who do a lot of their communication through their phones. You know, they actually have a way to connect with their peers. What I think the beautiful thing that they're seeing, though, is that there is value in being present in the same physical space with their peers. And I think that they took that for granted before. They thought, you know, we always kind of connect on our phones. You know, they didn't really value the experience of hanging out in the same way that now they are really craving it. And so they're getting a real lesson in what it means to connect in a more sometimes important way with their peers. So I think the language that we use with them, even as parents, you know, when we talk about isolation, that's just not really what we're experiencing. We are not in a jail cell that is dark and we can't get out of it and we can't communicate with anyone. So we are physically distanced. I think the other thing about empowering them that you talked about, Dan, was this idea that kids love to feel productive, and especially teens. And when we talk about what they can do, I think they're talking a lot about what they can't do right now. And all of that is true, and we need to acknowledge that. But what can happen is they can get really creative around, well, what can you do in this moment? And it might be something as small as the neighbor across the street who can't go into the grocery store, we're going to put dinner on her doorstep. Or my son is involved in the Righteous Conversations project, where he has a Holocaust survivor who is in his late 80s that he speaks to on the phone every week during the pandemic. And that allows that person to have, you know, but it actually is mutually beneficial for both of them because they get to have this connection during this time. And I think that gives the kids a sense of agency when they're experiencing maybe a sense of helplessness. So again, the both and, that there are areas in which they feel like they don't have the ability to do the things that are so crucial to their lives. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for them to say, what can I do during this time that I would not normally have the opportunity to do or think to do, that is not just about me, but is about me in relation to my community and the larger community out there.
Thank you, Lori. We got a lot of questions, and I believe these are for parents of younger children, about seeing some of the violence that has been on TV. And even though parents try to protect their children from seeing it, inadvertently, they often do. And we got questions about how to understand what they're seeing, and also to see the other side of what is happening now, and that's the protests that are peaceful and that people are standing up for injustice. How do you explain that to a younger child, let alone a teen? Because they're seeing, you know, both, and it's so important for them to understand that people are trying to make positive change to help others. How do you get that message through, especially for youngers?
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between trying to talk to them about what's going on and actually seeing a lot of graphic images, and especially depending on their age and their developmental stage. So I think that it can be really unproductive for them to see the 24/7 news cycle, because I think that's really, they need to know what happened, but they don't need to watch those images over and over and over. So that's one thing, is really, you know, do you have to have the news on all the time when your kids are around? That can be really hard. To give them, you know, we talk a lot right now about protecting our physical immune systems from the coronavirus. We also have to protect our psychological immune systems and our kids' psychological immune systems. And when you are exposing their world to all of these very, very disturbing images over and over, that can really take a toll on their psychological immune systems. What we want to do is we want to bolster them. So just like we want to do something healthy for our bodies, what can we do that's healthy for their minds? And so in this moment, I think it's transparency, again, is really important, and talking about these issues in a way that helps them to think about themselves and their place in the world, and what they can do in the world, is a really productive way to talk to them about what's going on. And then also to let them talk about their feelings about what has happened. I had a patient who said to me, there were fires near their house a couple of weeks ago because of the rioting and everything that was going on in the protests. And they're worried that their house was going to burn down. And so they were packing things up. And their young child said to them, I know somebody was killed, but why do we have to leave our house, right? And the mom said to me, how could I explain racism in 3 minutes? We had to get out of the house before our house burned down, right? And so what I said to her was, you don't explain racism in 3 minutes. And there's not one conversation. Like most things with our kids, it's scaffolding. There are lots of different conversations. And you want to meet your kids where they are. So you may have an agenda and want to talk about something with your kids, but when they bring you want to have a balance of how are you listening to what is going on inside of them and responding to what's going inside of them, instead of feeling like you need to sit them down and have this talk with them. Both, I think, need to happen in different ways. So with the young child, you explain in a calmer time. Nobody can hear anything when they're activated, right? So you need to be in a calm emotional state to actually have input come in and be received. It's why when your kid is having a tantrum, anything you say to them, they're not going to hear. There's no point in trying to have that conversation with them at that moment. At that moment, you want to help them regulate. And once they're regulated, then you can have a different kind of conversation with them. So the girl was very scared, and maybe that's a time to help her regulate. And then you have that conversation another time. And instead of just downloading information to them, you really want to hear what their questions are. You want to hear, what are they thinking about? How are they feeling about all of this? And you might start with how they're feeling about all of it before you even get to the thinking part, which is, what's going on, and maybe they're scared or sad or confused. And then you have a place to go in the conversation. But I don't think that that exposing them to material and images and scenes that they can't really process developmentally without having that support is going to be helpful for them. So I really encourage parents to say, turn off the news. This is not helpful for the younger kids. And they've heard things, they know what's going on, and start those conversations there. Meet them where they are and see where that goes.
Wise advice. Very wise advice.
And a lot of what do you think about that too, right? So when they'll say, well, why did this happen? Or they'll say, it's so unfair. Or why did this happen? Or why would someone do that, right? And you can explain a little bit about it. And again, keep checking in with them. What do you think about that? How do you feel about that? What are your ideas about this?
Very, very wise. And I think even, adults are questioning how much news is too much news. And, being, advised to turn it off and do something else that is, like read a book or just do something else rather than just be glued to the news all 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So we also got quite a few questions about, now that things are starting to open up, how do you have safe and reasonable reentry for teens especially, who are very anxious to see their friends and do social things, and yet what is your advice on re-entry and doing it as safely as possible?
Mm. Well, Lori, do you want to go back and forth on this one?
Yeah, you want to start, or
Sure.
you want?
Sure. I love what you just said about all the last response to the question. And let's just take a deep breath, and because there's so much Lori just said that's really so beautiful. And just say, as parents, we want to do the best for our kids. whatever the word best means, but it certainly is about, keeping them safe, about seeing them, about soothing them, helping them feel secure, these 4 S's of attachment. And I think the virus is a challenge, especially to the first one, safety. So in your role as what's called an attachment figure, you may feel, as I remember when my kids were young, I would certainly feel it a lot, this incredible drive to protect them. So the first step, I think, that Lori and I are really trying to present in our time here is that begin with yourself. So in terms of your question, Vicki, that comes in about, well, now that it's opening up, how do you approach that as a parent in terms of supporting your kids, having the social connectivity in physical gatherings that also keep them safe? And then, of course, how do you keep safe once they come back from their interactions? So the first thing to say is, to identify the feeling in you, which you may be very nervous about what this all means. Now, as a former pediatrician, I can just say, the viral side of this is complicated. And I think our wonderful Fauci, it talks about this being the worst nightmare of his life. And so we want to just say, as parents, why does he keep on saying that? Well, he keeps on saying that because a couple of reasons. Number one, it's an airborne virus that is both in a cough or a sneeze, but also in respiration because it's vaporized. It seems to hang on dust particles, not just in the cough that goes down in a droplet, but it does hang in the air for what looks like a couple of hours. So when you look at the science of epidemiology, that is how a contagious disease gets passed, why our scientists are saying they're really concerned is because of this first finding. It's transmitted by airborne, and also it can be on surfaces, which is easier just to keep your hands away from your face and away from surfaces, but it's another source of infection. So at least we know how it's transmitted. And so we're going to talk about what that allows you to do as a parent once you know the science. The second thing that unfortunately is part of the worst nightmare that he's talking about is that a third of people will get this corona SARS virus 2, this new coronavirus, this novel coronavirus that leads to the disease COVID-19. And a third, about 30%, will never have symptoms. So they'll have the virus, and even if they never get symptoms, there will be a period when they will still be contagious. That's one thing that's scary. The second scary thing that you just should know the science is that even if you're someone who gets the virus who's going to get sick, there can be a 2-day period before you get sick, that is, have fever and symptoms, where you're contagious. So those two medical findings are of deep concern that, you go, wow, okay, so we got the transmission route. We have the way in which you can be an asymptomatic person. So I know in families, where people are starting to go out, quite like I have a 90-year-old mom. So like, it's a big deal, who's in our viral, enclave and what they've been doing with themselves. And, when they come in contact with us, do we hug them? Do we not hug them? What do I do with my mom when she wants me to take my mask off and say hi to her? And I go, Mom, you're 90. I don't know if I'll do that. So, it's certainly age, and I'm even of an age, where I'm at risk, or if you have any illness that you're at risk, which a lot of people are, respiratory illnesses, heart illnesses, autoimmune illnesses. So fortunately, teenagers, in terms of this question, are pretty robust in not getting sick in a serious way, fortunately at this point anyway, although I know there's been an outbreak of unusual childhood illnesses that people can't figure out, which is worrisome. But if that were the case, this would be a completely parent freak out time. So at least you could say, well, okay, what's going to happen? My kid could get exposed to another adolescent. They get kind of sick. They're kind of okay. They get the antibody inside of them because of the infection. Fine. But if you're over 60 or 65 especially, or you have an illness, then it actually isn't so fine, because now your adolescent can come home having you say, well, do what you need to do. Well, what does that mean? You're going to wear a bandana over your face that really only helps for droplets, not popping out if you cough or sneeze, but it doesn't help you prevent getting what's inside of someone else or in the air in vaporized virus things. So the reality is you've got to have this 6-foot distance in addition to the masks. And I know I have relatives in Texas where wearing a mask is considered politically incorrect, that you're caving into science, which is bad, and you literally shouldn't do it. Where I have other friends who are in Massachusetts where you get a $300 fine if you don't wear a mask. So masks are really good because they at least decrease the spread of the virus. 6 feet is really good. But you got to ask yourself your question, what adolescent, when they're with their friends, when they could be goofing with them, especially if they're romantically involved with somebody, and all the ways, think about ourselves, would you really do that? So this is a moment where, I really want to build on what Lori said so beautifully. The psychological aspect of this is creating a huge toll. And I'm not saying just take off your mask and go hug everybody. But, at some point, especially if this can go on and on and on, we either have to wait for a vaccine, which doesn't look like we're going to get it in the next few months by any means. Usually takes about 1.5 years. So we have to really think, what about the mental health of our adolescents or our kids? And their creative solutions. So I'll give you one example. We have adolescents next door, and what we do, because we're really close with them, but we're not in their viral bubble, is we do outdoor movies every weekend. So, I have a little projector. I used to teach, in the days when you can teach in person, and I would have my projector. But now we stream movies onto the outside garage door. And, we have food, and we're 6 feet apart, and it's a big volume of air, and it's fine, and it's good. And, and we connect with them, and then they're doing the same with their friends. So there are ways, if you teach your adolescent especially, and just tell your younger kids about this too, you name what this virus is. It's invisible to the eye. So that's another part of the nightmare, that it's an invisible threat to life. And then say, this is what we need to do now. And just like, there was a time we didn't even know about bacteria and viruses, and we did all sorts of things. And we said, oh, let's wash your hands and all sorts of stuff. I think if kids are informed about what's going on, then at least they can make some kind of decision about, okay, I can be communicating and connecting with my friends, but I need to be careful not to get so close to, especially in a closed air space, of breathing in the air of other people. Or if I'm in a closed air space, I absolutely need to be wearing a mask. Something as simple as that. If I really don't want to wear a mask and I want to see my friend, go outside where there's a huge volume of air. So the biology of it is the dilution of the virus makes a difference. You get a huge dose of that virus, it's likely to infect you. If you get a little bit that's in a huge volume of air, you're probably going to be fine. So this is just knowing about the biology. And if I were still a pediatrician, I would, say this kind of thing to all my parents. As a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I would say, you can inform your kid, but you got to kind of go with the flow. These are hard times, and the kids need to be with each other really soon. I mean, I work a lot with schools, and it's a really tough decision. Now, they're in a position of legal concerns about being sued, so it's very complicated. But in the larger frame, they need to figure out perhaps how to do classrooms outside. We have big volumes of air. So when kids are not going to pay attention to the 6-foot rule, at least there'll be a lot of air circulating among them,
Lori, what would you tell your son when he's starting to go out and wanting to be with his buddies and things are starting to open up?
Yeah. First of all, Dan, can you come to my house and talk to my son?
Yeah, or I could Zoom with him at least.
Yeah, you got to Zoom with him, exactly.
I will.
But,
absolutely.
Because that was so beautifully said. And I think that, when your parent says that, it's very different from when somebody like Dan says that. So I think the other thing too, though, is to really talk about, what I hear from my son is, well, so-and-so is going to play with his friend. They're going to play basketball. Why can't I go play basketball? They're all doing this now. And my role is different. And so I think it's really important that when I talk to my son about it, that I explain to him in less eloquently than Dan did, but the same content, which is about, here's the situation, here's the why of it. And also, he has a grandmother that he likes to see, and, he wouldn't be able to be around grandma. I'm no spring chicken. So, there's also that. And so it's really about not just himself, but it's about the larger world. Now, teenagers don't sometimes care all that much. I think they say they care, but I think when they have been deprived of social contact for months and months and months, I think that it becomes really hard to make those sort of ethical decisions. And so we've come up with sort of compromises, right, that still fit in. So I've told him that he can go, he hasn't done it yet, but I think in this coming week we will, now that school's out. I told him he can play tennis. And he's, so he can't play basketball, but he can play tennis, which is not his favorite thing. Basketball is his favorite thing, but it's something. And he's excited. Like, he's excited to be, outside and doing something like that. So there's something, right?
And have him, Lori, and just make sure he has some hand sanitizer, doesn't touch his face, because that ball is
actually, there's a whole set of rules that I read about when the tennis place sends out a whole set of rules about who can touch what balls, who can touch what, the gloves, the like everything, the sanitizer. You have to have your name on the ball so that you don't touch somebody else. I mean, it's a whole thing. But great, I'm thrilled with that option. And I think that when his friends are texting him and saying, hey, come out and play with us, that's really hard. And yet, that when it comes to our health, there's just, in our house, at least, there's just no flexibility around that right now, but things change. And so here's where we are. I really I think it's hard for all of us, but especially for teenagers, because remember that the percentage of their life that this is taking up, my son has only had 14 years, right? So 3 months is a very big percentage of his life compared to 3 months in the percentage of my life. So I might say, well, it's been 3 months. He might say it's been an eternity. So I think when, really having that perspective of things are changing, right? And so right now, this week, those are the rules, and we're going to be adaptable and flexible, and we're going to see how things look as things change. And that's the part of this that I think is the uncertainty is hard to tolerate. But I think there's also something hopeful in that, which is this is the rule right now, today, this week, but it might change. So here's where we are right now. And I think that makes it easier to, take the steps that maybe are hard to take. And I think the other thing, again, is really the understanding of you can't do your favorite thing right now, which is basketball. You can't actually hang out with your friends right now. But maybe we could figure out something, again, like Dan was saying, you could go to maybe a drive-in movie, or you could do where you're all in your cars and you don't roll down the windows. There might be other ways to kind of be around people, but in a way that is safer. And so there's no easy answer. And I don't think we should pretend to our kids that we have an easy answer. Again, I think the transparency is really important, which is, here's what the science says right now. Here's why we're doing this. Here are the things we can do. Do you have any creative ideas? And let's talk about whether those might work. If it's 6 feet apart and we're, doing something outside, what are some ideas you have about that?
All really excellent suggestions. Outdoor activities like tennis, that was a wonderful solution to being with someone and being outdoors. And thank you, Lori. We have a lot of questions here in the Q&A. So our first question here is from Jessie. How can we as parents combat our own stresses while working to unwind and reverse the hardwiring for stress of our children? How can we use this unique situation of proximity with each other at home to create safe space for our children and try to lower the severity of these emotional spikes?
Yeah.
Keep from hardwiring our children for stress and being fearful.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say briefly to start with, my life partner and work partner, Caroline Welsh, wrote a book before the pandemic, which came out right when the pandemic started, The Gift of Presence, which actually addresses this question perfectly. And in The Gift of Presence, you see where it's basically what Lori and I are saying. When you actually develop the capacity to have receptive awareness, literally to sit in this kind of hub of your wheel, if you will, or to be with mindfulness or just openness, right? To be with what is as it is. That's what presence means. Then you're able to actually find out what really matters in your life, to find purpose. And the studies that Caroline reviews are amazing, that when you live with purpose, you actually rewire yourself, just like you're asking, to stay clear-minded, and to stay steady in the face of these challenges. The other things besides purpose that Caroline talks about are pivoting, which is exactly what we've had to do in the pandemic, how you shift to a new way of living. This is kind of forced pivoting. And she looks at what the science of change is. And, you know, the brain is an anticipation machine. It wants to know what's going to happen next. So part of the challenge of the experience of uncertainty is that we can feel that it's danger. So we need to learn to be in this more open, spacious way of embracing change and dealing with the uncertainty that comes with it, so we can reduce the anxiety we have. And the last thing that she talks about in terms of these P's, besides purpose and pivoting, is pacing. And so one way that I try to even just pace myself, and if I had little kids at home, I would try to do this, is a colleague, David Rock, and I have this thing called the Healthy Mind Platter. And it tells you what the research shows that you ought to be doing every day to keep your mind healthy and to keep your actually brain, what's called integrated, which is how you literally rewire the brain to be more resilient. And some of those include making sure you get good sleep, having, you know, connecting time with people and nature, having focused time where you're not distracted all over, like reading a book like you're suggesting, Vicki, where you have downtime, where you're just not having anything planned, playtime where you're able to just have fun and goof around, and then physical time, make sure you keep your body active. And the seventh of these important times that research shows will help you rewire your brain is time in, which is basically taking time to reflect, even if it's for a few minutes. And Caroline in her book has lots of exercises, you know, in the book Aware that I wrote, or even Brainstorm, the great pages of Brainstorm, teach you how to take time in and do these reflective practices, which the research shows literally rewire the brain, make it more integrated, and actually reduce the stress hormone cortisol, improve immune function, optimize actually how your heart is working with your head, your cardiovascular system, reduces inflammation, and even optimizes an enzyme called telomerase that repairs and maintains the ends of your chromosomes. So when you look at these factors, if I said there was a vitamin that you would take, and Lori and I said, take the vitamin, you take it. But in fact, there is a vitamin. It's these time in practices that develop presence. And when you do them, you actually rewire yourself to be more resilient. And as my colleagues say up at UC San Francisco, they've shown it actually slows the aging process in addition to reducing stress. So these are things research has shown work, and you can actually learn to do them.
Fascinating. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, it's so important when we think about what are the things that, again, I think what you're talking about again is the psychological immune system and making sure that we bolster that. And I think that what we do with our anxiety is really important. So there's productive anxiety, right? We always think of anxiety as a negative emotion. To me, by the way, there are no negative emotions, because our feelings are sort of like our compass. They tell us what we need, which way to go. And if we don't access our feelings, it's almost like we're walking around with a glitchy GPS. So we are sort of chaotic and all over the place. So when we think about anxiety, I think people, the minute they feel anxiety, they want to get rid of it. And there's a really healthy kind of anxiety, which is productive anxiety. And that's when you're having a reasonable amount of worry to something in the environment, and that motivates you to take steps that will protect you. So it's anxiety that says something's off, I need to do something about this. So productive anxiety in the time of COVID. Sorry, something went on my screen. Productive anxiety. Oh, something keeps going on my screen. And again, sorry. Oh, this is kind of. So productive anxiety in the time of COVID is we're reasonably worried about the spread of this virus. And so what are we doing? We are wearing masks, we are social distancing, physically distancing, I should say. We are washing our hands a lot, right? We're doing all the things that we need to do. If we weren't worried about the spread of the virus, we wouldn't be doing any of this, and many more of us would be getting sick. Unproductive anxiety, on the other hand, is obsessive rumination. Right? It's where you keep spinning around and around. And like you said, Dan, that the brain, it's an anticipation machine, right? So what happens is when humans don't do well with uncertainty, we tend to fill in the story for ourselves because we want to know what's going to happen. And generally we fill it in with something negative, right? We don't say it's all going to turn out great. We fill it in with something that's very frightening to us. That's unproductive anxiety. You're futurizing, you're catastrophizing, you're worried about something that hasn't happened yet and may never happen. And so as parents, you're asking, Vicki, what can we do about our anxiety? It's to catch yourself when you are spiraling in this unproductive anxiety. And it's really about staying present and not future tripping into some future that hasn't happened yet. And really saying, here I am in the present moment, and really noticing the reality of that, which is you are safe in the present moment. Mm-hmm. And so that's one way to look at that. Another thing that I want to say about taking care of ourselves, and Dan was talking about the ways that we can do that. Another one is about privacy, which is that a lot of us talk about, again, which is that word isolation. A lot of us are sort of cooped up with our families and we love these people dearly. And at the same time, it is hard to be around the people that we love 24/7 in a way that we're not used to. And so what I'm hearing from a lot of parents in my practice is that they don't have enough privacy. They don't have time that is where nobody is in their physical space, right? Where they can just kind of process what's going on or let their minds wander or just not be around other people. And so I think it's really important for couples, especially right now, parents, to talk about, with their kids around and each other around, how can they meet each other's needs in that way? When people are doing remote therapy sessions with me, they need to find a private place to talk to me so that nobody else can hear. And they either go to their cars, sometimes they're taking a walk, often they're in their closets, often they're in their bathroom sitting on a toilet seat with the toilet down, the cover down. And, these private spaces, wherever you can find it. It's really important that you don't forget that you need some time to go inside a little bit too. So I think that sometimes what I found is that people are really stressed out and then they go and they want to they take it out on their family. Right. And so what happens is you don't realize that you're feeling that emotion. And so what we do is if we don't acknowledge we're feeling that emotion, it comes out in other ways. It'll come out in the way that you're acting relationally in your family. It'll come out in too much food or too much wine or too much mindless internet, right? There's so many ways that our emotions will come out in other ways. So if you can find some time to yourself, you will feel so refreshed from having had the experience of saying, wait, let me just check in with myself for a little bit here because I haven't had a chance to do that.
That's beautiful. I love that, Lori. And, that privacy can include a really simple insight from neuroscience, which is that, let's say you take the time Lori's suggesting, find some privacy, and now your mind is having all these stories go on and on and on. One thing from neuroscience that we now know is that narrative chatter is mostly in the middle of your brain, but on the sides of the brain is where we actually have sensation. And so even if you get yourself in the car and just focus on your breath or follow your fingers or watch the light streaming in through the windows of the car or go for a walk and feel the sensation of the breeze on your cheek, it's amazing. But the focus of attention on sensation decreases the chattering of obsessive thoughts in the middle areas of the brain. So it's the middle mental chatter versus the side sensory stuff. So however you can immerse yourself in sensation will actually inhibit this chatter that's going on. And that's just a simple little clue about what you can do in this private time to have your mind settle. It doesn't become empty, it just becomes clear. And in that clarity, you actually develop this movement towards well-being instead of being obsessed, like Lori is so articulately saying. And just to say that, you know, these things that we're talking about, and I think it's just worth reminding ourselves, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So even if we're making suggestions on how to do it, I'll speak for myself at least, you know, I flub up all the time. I make mistakes. And in the parenting books I write, I'm always writing about my mistakes, sometimes the dismay of my kids when they were younger, you know, because I want people to know that there's no such thing as perfection in parenting. There's just having kind of a direction you're taking, trying to have private time and trying to have this presence, so that then when you make a mistake, making a repair, reconnecting after a disconnection, for example, is really what it's about. And your kids will learn from you that you could recognize when maybe you got agitated or obsessed with something or weren't as present as you might have been. You realize that, you come to them and make a reconnection, and that repair actually teaches them that you can be vulnerable and human, that you can recognize when you didn't do it the way you ideally wanted to, and you can come back and make a reconnection. And that is what resilience grows from, those ruptures and repairs, those disconnections that then lead to reconnection. And your child learns from you, I just need to show up as a person. And that's where you become a role model for how to make it through this pandemic.
Such wise advice. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Lori. Unfortunately, we are out of time. There are so many questions here, but we just are so grateful to you. And on this last note, there's one note here from Lisa, thanking you all for all your wonderful and calming advice, and much appreciated from your fans at Common Sense Media. I want to thank you on behalf of the Friends of Semel, the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, and WOW, the Wonder of Women, which we hope will go live next spring. And Lori, we want you back. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, and it's such wise advice for all of us as parents. And I'm a grandparent, so I've learned a lot this hour too. And thank you very, very much. We are very grateful to you, and very grateful to everybody that's tuned in today. Thank you. We are very grateful. We hope you stay safe and well, and look forward to seeing you at future Open Mind programs. Thank you, everyone.